Time magazine named Helen Keller one of the 20th century's top heroes and icons. Not only did this deaf-blind woman valiantly triumph over her own disabilities to attain heights of achievement, she devoted her life to improving conditions for the disabled around the globe, thus becoming an inspiration to millions of people the world over. Mark Twain, one of Helen's greatest friends, said of her, "Helen Keller is fellow to the rest of the immortals."
I think Helen Keller, more than any other person throughout history, helped to completely change the dynamic of what it means to be disabled. When she spoke and when she wrote, people, she'd make people stop and reflect and say, hey, she may not be able to see, she may not be able to hear, but we're the same. And in that way, she helped people connect with their common humanity, and she really began to define the modern conception of what it means to be a human being.
This luminous woman, this person of such intense empathy, of interest in everybody and everything. She was perhaps the most totally alive human being I have ever met.
I believe that how we remember Helen Keller really matters. We tend to think of her only with pity, or we remember her as a miracle, as a saint. When we do that, we limit how we understand people with disabilities today. And that's a legacy she would not have wanted. She really fought to be remembered as a full human being.
While many remember Helen Keller exclusively as a great humanitarian, others know her only as the innocent, inspirational 7-year-old from The Miracle Worker, whom Annie Sullivan taught to fingerspell water at the water pump. But few know about the richness of her soul, personality, and artistic talent. Helen Keller had a deep spiritual life, which influenced virtually every aspect of her being. She was also an idealist, a social activist, and a brilliant writer with the heart of a poet. A full and multidimensional human being, Helen Keller's life and ideas matter as much today as they did a generation ago. Helen Keller was born in 1880 in Tuscumbia, Alabama. She was a normal, hearing-sighted infant with loving parents. Her father, Arthur Keller, formerly a captain in the Confederate cavalry, was the editor of the local newspaper, a U.S. Marshal, and a deacon in his Presbyterian church. Helen's mother, Kate, a cultivated Episcopalian, was witty and widely read, with a gracious manner.
Helen Keller had been a bright, precocious child, emotionally normal, until at the age of 19 months she was hit by a mysterious disease, maybe a viral encephalitis, maybe a meningitis, which rendered her completely deaf and blind.
According to Helen, her experience of this new, dark, silent world was like that of a wild animal operating only on instinct.
I did not know that I am. I lived in a no world. My days were blank without past, present, or future. There was not one spark of emotion or rational thought. It was not day nor night, but vacancy absorbing space.
Little Helen was a paradox. On the one hand, she seemed to have uncanny intuition. Possessed of a natural tendency to gesture, she contrived some 60 signs with which to communicate her desires. Push meant go, for example, and pull meant stay. On the other hand, she would rage around the house, emotionally uncontrollable. Her family came to think she was completely untrainable and ineducable. Fortuitously, Mrs. Keller read an article by Charles Dickens that was to change the course of their lives. Dickens described how the famous Perkins School for the Blind in Boston had successfully taught a young deaf-blind child, Laura Bridgman. The Kellers contacted Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, who knew of Perkins and recommended it. The Perkins School soon arranged for Annie Sullivan, the half-blind, recent valedictorian, to take on the daunting assignment of Helen's education. Besides being exceptionally bright, Annie was caring, tough, rebellious, hardworking, and stubborn, qualities she had developed as an orphan raised in Tewksbury, a Boston poorhouse. She would need all of these qualities to face the challenges that lay ahead. Annie diligently prepared for the task of teaching Helen Keller by studying the Laura Bridgman case and by learning the manual alphabet. Hand signing had been invented by Spanish Benedictine monks in the Middle Ages as a means of communicating while keeping their vow of silence. After 6 months of training, Annie was ready, and she set forth on a journey to Alabama that was to determine her entire life. She arrived in Tuscumbia March 3, 1887. Later, Helen would always celebrate March 3rd as the birthday of her very soul. Helen's first action upon meeting Annie was to launch into a tantrum, but Annie was not discouraged.
I am not sorry I have come. I feel the future holds something good for me. My challenge is to solve how to teach discipline and control Helen without breaking her spirit. Annie Sullivan.
Week after week, the gifted and patient Annie Sullivan put objects in Helen's hands and spelled their names into her palm, despite no visible signs of success. Helen appeared unable to make any mental connection between the two actions.
It is almost as if the absence of language had caused an inability to code events or order them or remember them subsequently. The difficulties facing someone who is deaf and blind, of course, are enormous.
Finally, after more than a month of working with her unruly student, Annie succeeded in reaching Helen's mind. As the family pump gushed forth water onto Helen's hand, Annie simultaneously spelled into it W-A-T-E-R and facilitated a connection in Helen's consciousness between object and sign.
I stood still, my whole body's attention fixed on the motions of her fingers as the cool stream flowed over my hand. All at once, there was a strange stir within me, a misty consciousness, a sense of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought, and somehow the mystery of language was revealed to me. Everything had a name, and each name gave birth to a new thought.
After this revelation of words and meanings, she learned to fingerspell 30 words that first day and became ravenous to learn the name of everything around her, including Annie, who became the generic name teacher.
Delicious sensations rippled through me, and sweet, strange things that were locked up in my heart began to sing. A ray of light from another soul touched the darkness of my mind, and I awoke to the joy and beauty of life. Helen got up this morning like a radiant fairy, asking the name of everything and kissing me for every gladness. Helen is no ordinary child. Something tells me that I shall succeed beyond my dreams. Annie Sullivan.
Annie was right. Under her tutelage, Helen's capacity to learn exceeded all expectations. Annie had a brilliant overall plan, which included teaching discipline and the manual language, while allowing time for creative play in nature. No longer frustrated by her isolation, the new personality which emerged like a butterfly from Helen's angry former self was a model of harmony and delight, and she was avid to learn everything that was presented to her.
The plan finally succeeded. After months of walking together in the woods and spelling the entire universe into each other's hands, they began to act like Siamese twins, joined by their flying fingers and becoming more and more dependent on their new bond of language.
In time, Annie sent her report on Helen to the director of the Perkins School, who published the case, making Annie and Helen overnight celebrities. Annie was called a miracle worker and Helen a national treasure. The public was enthralled, and the world opened its doors to Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan. The Perkins School invited Helen to attend, with Annie assisting. Prominent friends, including Alexander Graham Bell, started an education fund to pay for Helen's tuition. At that time, a Swedenborgian benefactor, Hubbard William Youngie, made a significant contribution to the Perkins fundraising drive. Interestingly enough, Emanuel Swedenborg was the philosopher who would most profoundly impact Helen's entire life. Months later, on a street in Boston, Mr. Youngie was delighted to meet some of the women fundraisers accompanied by Annie and Helen.
They stopped him, and she said, "This is Helen Keller and her teacher, Annie Sullivan, who you helped bring to the Perkins School." The little girl ran her fingers up and down the lapels of his coat. He was so overcome by the experience of this little girl trying so hard to communicate that he wept.
Annie and Helen spent 4 years at the Perkins School. They worked almost as one, with Annie attending many of the classes, spelling every word into Helen's hands. Their relationship was unique and complex. Of necessity, completely interdependent. They were both gifted with extreme intelligence, and yet dearly prized their independence of thought. For the rest of their lives, Annie and Helen would navigate this delicate balance. Often, people thought of them as one person.
You are a wonderful creative, Miss Keller. The most wonderful in the world, you and your other half together, Miss Sullivan, since it took the pair of you to make a complete and perfect whole. Mark Twain.
During this time, many began to notice Helen's extraordinary memory. Annie describes Helen's recounting of a gathering of physicians and their families.
6 months later, she unhesitatingly spelled more than 100 names, and she remembered the states and cities in which many of these gentlemen resided. Annie Sullivan.
Helen's life centered on her love of letter writing, reading books, and nature. The wonders of nature thrilled her senses of touch and smell, and books brought the world to her. Through reading, Helen's insatiable curiosity soon awakened to great questions about God and religion.
Why does the great Father in heaven think it is best for us to have pain sometimes? What is spirit? Where is heaven? Who made God? What is soul?
Young Helen's search for answers led her to a profound and revealing observation, one that combined both her spiritual quest and her avid literary pursuits.
If I can write what my soul thinks, then it will be visible, and the words will be its body.
As Helen's interest in spiritual questions continued, she had an unexpected and life-changing experience.
Helen had an experience when she was around 12 years old. She was sitting in her library at home, quietly reading a history book, and suddenly she had what she perceived to be an out-of-body experience. She felt as though her soul had been in Athens. In that moment, she realized that in the sense of touch, she had found an eye, and that her soul was independent of time and place.
The bright, amazing realization seemed to catch my mind and set it ablaze. Space was nothing to spirit. I perceived the realness of my soul and its sheer independence of all conditions of place and body. It was clear to me that it was because I was a spirit that I had so vividly seen and felt a place thousands of miles away. In that new consciousness shone the presence of God, himself a spirit everywhere at once, the Creator dwelling in all the universe simultaneously.
This extraordinary experience inspired in Helen a quest that ignited her mind. It generated even more spiritual questions, many of which centered on her bewildering thoughts about the Bible. Was God loving or wrathful? What and who is God?
Many of the stories in the Bible seemed like Greek and Roman myths, scarcely a reflection of the being whose face shone so benign, beautiful, and radiant in my heart.
Helen began experiencing a crisis of faith. Where was the God she felt in her heart? Did he really exist? What she would come to see as divine providence intervened when, at age 13, Alexander Graham Bell introduced her to John Hitz, a former consul general for Switzerland. Hitz had lost much of his hearing, and he now distributed information about the deaf via Bell's magazine Volta Review. Like her earlier benefactor, Mr. Jungi, Mr. Hitz was devoted to the philosophy of Emanuel Swedenborg.
John Hitz met Helen Keller when Helen was 13 years old. John Hitz became her spiritual mentor. She called him my Pflegevater, which in German is foster father. She actually called him the foster father of her soul.
In answer to Helen's ongoing spiritual questions, Hitz gave her a Braille copy of Emanuel Swedenborg's book, Heaven and Hell. This revolutionary work of visionary theology was something of a runaway bestseller in 19th century America. Indeed, Henry Ward Beecher, a popular preacher of the day, said nobody was educated who had not read Swedenborg. Just as Helen Keller's life changed for the first time when she awakened to words, so after reading Heaven and Hell, her life changed for a second time. She now awakened to spirit. Helen's whole inner being resonated with Swedenborg's words.
I never again doubted that there is a spiritual body within my own imperfect one, and within a few dark years, the eyes within my eyes would open to a world infinitely more wonderful, complete, and satisfying than this. I let myself go and tried to puzzle out the long words and weighty thoughts of the Swedish seer.
Emanuel Swedenborg was an eminent 18th century Swedish scientist, statesman, philosopher, and inventor. Suddenly, at the age of 57, he had a spiritual awakening, and for the next 27 years, he meticulously recorded his experiences of heightened consciousness and visions of the afterlife. Over time, Swedenborg's spiritual writings accumulated into a comprehensive body of theological work on a wide range of spiritual subjects, including what happens after death, spirits and angels, the true nature of love, God and Scripture, heaven and hell, and the meaning and purpose of life.
He wrote and published extensive documentation of his experiences of the afterlife, including his most popular title, Heaven and Hell. He found that in the other life there were indeed angels and devils, but they were not a separately created race of genderless beings. They were just people like you and I who had passed on into the afterlife.
Swedenborg's visionary journeys showed him a heaven that was multidimensional and open to people of all religions.
Swedenborg described a heaven that was open to all people in every faith tradition, as long as they lived according to the good tenets of their faith, which was to love one another. This was an ecumenical heaven whose God was an all-inclusive God that transcended every religious sect and welcomed all into his loving arms.
All through Swedenborg's books shines an image of the eternal love which embraces every human being.
Swedenborg's description of a loving God and an afterlife where no one would suffer from disabilities gave Helen great hope. She also found his writings on heaven and living a loving and useful life profoundly inspiring.
Swedenborg had the repeated experience of seeing friends and acquaintances of his after they had passed on, and he saw that some went to hell and some went to heaven. He observed that those who went to hell were people who were primarily self-involved and not caring of others. And he saw that those who went to heaven were people who had devoted their lives to useful service, to being of benefit to others. Swedenborg also found that joys and pleasures that we selfishly hold on to actually evaporate over time. But joy and pleasure that we share and wish on others grows and strengthens. These two concepts of usefulness and the sharing of joy were vital to Helen Keller. Their imprint is visible in the whole way that she conducted her life.
According to Swedenborg, heaven is a kingdom of uses where endless interests await us. We go to heaven every time we think a noble thought, and we stay there when it has become our happiness to serve others.
In addition to Helen Keller, many remarkable people the world over found inspiration in the spiritual writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, including Goethe, Balzac, Dostoevsky, Yeats, Blake, Emerson, and the Zen master D.T. Suzuki, who dubbed him the Buddha of the North. For Helen, John Hitz acted as a mentor and conduit to Emanuel Swedenborg, spirituality, and philosophy. He became the pivotal living influence in her spiritual life.
From the moment of their first meeting, Helen Keller and John Hitz became lifelong friends. He awoke early every morning and translated items into Braille for her that he thought she would find especially interesting. For the most part, he translated the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg into Braille, sent them to her in letters.
Dear Helen, I completed for you my transcript into Braille of Swedenborg's Divine Love and the Divine Wisdom. It explains the distinction that exists in all created things from the Trinity in God, and shows how this is manifested in man, who is the image of the divine. It is a work that no student of philosophy can afford to overlook. Affectionately yours, John Hitz.
And every summer he visited for 6 weeks, during which time they took long walks together, talking about life, religion, matters of the soul, and the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg.
I plunge my hands deep into my large Braille volumes containing Swedenborg's teachings and withdraw them full of the secrets of the spiritual world. The inner or mystic sense gives me a vision of the unseen. Here was a faith that I felt so keenly. The separateness between soul and body, between a realm I could picture as a whole and the chaos of fragmentary things. Swedenborg taught me that there is a spiritual body within the material one, with perfect senses that mattered more than the material body.
This seminal insight of Swedenborg of the existence of a perfect spiritual body within the physical one was of central importance to Helen. It confirmed her own belief that although her body was disabled, her soul was whole. Swedenborg's concepts about the relationship between the unseen and physical realms also diminished the significance of her deaf blindness. With fewer outer distractions, Helen's disabilities made it possible for her to be more attentive to her own inner world.
True, I cannot see the stars scattered in the heavens, but other stars just as bright shine in my soul. Soul is very real and very important to me. I believe that the universe is made of the same stuff as I am. To me, the soul is a land of promise, splendid with immortal youth, hope, and inexhaustible possibilities.
While Annie Sullivan was agnostic and had little interest in religion, she never interfered with Helen's spiritual inclinations, and she thoroughly enjoyed the kindly Hitz. During their treasured times together, they were an inseparable trio.
When John Hitz and Helen Keller discussed spiritual matters, chief among them was the idea of the afterlife, the deeper meaning of the Bible, and especially the idea that the purpose of life is to be useful. As Emanuel Swedenborg put it, the kingdom of heaven is a kingdom of useful service.
From the age of 16, Helen considered herself a Swedenborgian and continued to read his works throughout her life.
Swedenborg's writings are the voice in my silence. When I remember these truths, I am strong again and full of joy. I am no longer deaf and blind. His writings have brought down to me truths from heaven that have given my spirit 1,000 wings.
Helen Keller grew into a strong-willed, beautiful, and passionate young woman, often surrounded by friends like Alexander Graham Bell. She ardently desired to learn to speak, and so, over the years, worked with voice teachers at this nearly impossible challenge. Remarkably, Helen succeeded, though her actual speech was often difficult to understand.
The pain and disappointment I have suffered from not speaking well are incalculable, but it is a price worth paying for the joy I have in being able to keep this living bond between the outer world and myself.
Throughout Helen's life, she valiantly coped with life's disappointments and challenges by drawing strength from the deep well of her spiritual faith.
Keller had faith. She believed very passionately in God. Her faith gave her hope. It gave her commitment to the future. It gave her solace when she needed it. She, like all of us, sought meaning in life. I believe she sought meaning even more so than many people because of the belief that people with disabilities were incompetent, were worthless.
Helen continued her high school studies at a New York school for the deaf. She yearned to get a college degree so she could become a self-supporting writer. Undaunted, she set her sights on Radcliffe College in Cambridge. Helen Keller passed her entrance exams and entered Radcliffe College in 1900 with Annie by her side. Annie accompanied Helen to every class and spent 7 hours a day tirelessly signing the lectures and reading assignments into Helen's hand. The cheerful face Helen showed the world masked a deep sadness at Radcliffe. No matter how hard she worked, she wasn't like the other girls and didn't fit in.
Much of my life in college is tedious. Most of the books are not in raised print, and I have them spelled out in my hand, word by word. Also, I cannot make notes in class. When I go home, I jot down in Braille what I remember of the lecture. That all takes extra time. I must depend largely on my memory to retain what my fingers have gathered.
In addition to her college courses, Helen agreed to write her life story for the Ladies' Home Journal magazine. An editor, John Macy, gave her invaluable help, and the installments were written and published in a book. The enormous success of The Story of My Life gave Helen hope that she might depend on her writing skills to financially secure a future for Annie and herself. While Annie never wavered in her devotion to Helen's education, the Radcliffe years put incredible strain on her deteriorating eyes. In 1904, Helen Keller became not only the first deaf-blind woman to graduate from Radcliffe College, but she graduated summa cum laude with fluency in French, German, Greek, and Italian.
I grow stronger in the conviction that there is nothing good or right which we cannot accomplish if we have the will to strive. I have never believed that my limitations were in any sense punishments or accidents. I thank God for my handicaps, for through them I have found myself, my work, and my God.
After graduation, the nationally famous Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan lived outside Boston. Visitors often remarked that their unique household was full of joy, easy laughter, and good conversation. Helen's charming personality was widely appreciated for being positive and full of goodwill, and she formed fast and deep friendships. One such friend was Mark Twain.
I loved Mark Twain. He knew that we don't think with ears and eyes, and that our capacity for thought is not measured by the five senses. He treated me like a competent human being. He smiled not with his mouth, but with his mind, a gesture of the soul rather than of the face.
Annie had a brief marriage to Helen's editor, John Macy. For a few years, the trio lived under the same roof, and life was pleasant and, for the first time, almost traditional. Helen, too, had a fiancé, and later another suitor, but sadly, her family discouraged these relationships, deeming marriage inappropriate for a disabled person. Yet, once again, Helen found a way to transform her suffering into a force for good.
Fate has denied me a husband and the joys of motherhood. I am glad I have had the experience of being loved, but I have become reconciled to my fate. I have never dreamed of suppressing that God-given creative impulse. I simply directed that whole force of my heart energy to the accomplishment of difficult tasks and the service of others less fortunate than myself.
Helen struggled to overcome the perception that her disabilities made her incapable of independent thought or functioning in public life.
I have the advantage of a mind trained to think, and that is the difference between myself and most people, not my blindness and their sight.
Always the idealist, Helen became a social activist, campaigning and writing articles about a variety of issues, including socialism, women's suffrage, peace, and racial discrimination. Helen Keller was especially active in campaigning against preventable blindness. Partly due to her public efforts in the cause of newborn blindness, which stemmed from mothers infected with venereal disease, this scourge was greatly reduced. Some called her a crusading Joan of Arc. Her commitment to the public good was galvanized by her spiritual beliefs.
Cooperation with God, confidence in His unwearying help, learning to understand more truths in the Word, living according to them, and doing good for its own sake. These are the only wholesome ways for mortals to rise out of their old selves and rebuild their world.
Through the practice of her faith, Helen Keller grew increasingly capable of meeting life's challenges. This was shown in 1908, when her beloved John Hitz collapsed in her very presence and died soon after. During this crisis, Helen's deep religious convictions helped her handle the profound grief and loss of her significant spiritual mentor.
Helen Keller deeply believed in the spiritual world. She knew that in the life to come, her eyes would be open and her ears would be unstopped. It was through this deep faith that she was able to find peace with the death of loved ones.
Truly, I have looked into the very heart of darkness and refused to yield to its paralyzing influence. The pain and disappointments I have endured are incalculable. But Swedenborg shows that in every event, we have a choice, and that to choose is to create. So I use my will, choose life, and reject its opposite, nothingness. The marvelous richness of human experience would lose something of rewarding joy if there were no limitations to overcome.
Helen Keller's profound love of words and writing provided a broad avenue for her to explore and contribute to the world. The written word helped her to overcome her limitations, and she made an outstanding literary contribution.
Well, Helen Keller loved the written word. She loved reading it. She loved producing it. And when she was just a very young child, she realized that words could be very powerful. It was her very first written words that propelled her into the international stage.
With an embossed book on my knee or seated at my typewriter, I am not conscious of any handicap. In spirit and mind, I am untrammeled.
Helen Keller directed her writing talent to explaining her Swedenborgian faith. In 1927, Doubleday published her book, My Religion, in which she expressed her profound appreciation and understanding of Swedenborg's theology.
Swedenborg is the light bringer to my darkness. It would be such a joy to me if I might be the instrument of bringing Swedenborg to a world that is spiritually deaf and blind. I cannot imagine myself living without religion. I could as easily fancy a living body without a heart.
My Religion was translated into numerous languages and sold well throughout the world. Nevertheless, Helen was never happy with its structure. Therefore, Dr. Ray Silverman was motivated to rearrange the material to improve its flow, and the Swedenborg Foundation published it in 1994 as Light in My Darkness.
The key to understanding Helen Keller's life and extraordinary accomplishments is understanding her faith. It first helped her to overcome her limitations and then guided her in the direction of a useful, giving life.
At the end of My Religion, she wrote, "To one who is deaf and blind, the spiritual world offers no difficulty." According to the Swedenborgian tradition, her disabilities offered no difficulty at all. It also offered her reassurance that service was important, and she used that to justify her political actions.
Over her lifetime, Helen Keller wrote 7 books, and she also wrote poetry, political commentary, and literary essays. Incomprehensible though it may seem, she consistently demonstrated an exceptionally beautiful style and command of English.
We should not forget that Helen Keller never heard a sentence, not a faulty sentence or a correct sentence or a beautifully phrased sentence in order to compare them. Her language was silent and tactual.
Amazingly, Helen Keller's writing style was full of visual imagery. For example, after visiting the newly opened Empire State Building, she wrote,
I concede that my guide saw 1,000 things that escaped me, but I am not envious, for imagination creates distances that reach to the end of the world. There was the Hudson, more like the flash of a sword blade than a noble river, and the little island of Manhattan, set like a little jewel in the nest of rainbow waters.
Critics and scientists were mystified as to how Helen Keller was able to express such rich visual imagery in her writing. Helen later wrote that her sense of imagination and visual imagery came from her understanding of Swedenborg's concept of correspondences.
I now know there are 2 worlds. One we can measure with line and rule, and the other we can feel with our hearts and intuition.
In Correspondences, Swedenborg explains that while there are 2 distinct worlds, the physical and the spiritual, they relate and mirror one another.
Deny me this correspondence, this internal sense, and I become as a bat which wanders on the wing. Correspondence is adequate to all life, through the whole range of phenomena. The flash of thought and its swiftness explain the lightning flash and the sweep of a comet through the heavens. I recognize truth by the clearness it gives my thought, and knowing what that clearness is, I can imagine what light is to the eye. It is not a convention of language, but a feeling of reality.
In particular, Swedenborg's concept of correspondences gave Helen a powerful new insight into the moment when Annie finger-spelled water into her hand. According to Swedenborg, water corresponds symbolically to truth. And for Helen, the water flowing from her family pump certainly represented a whole new world of meaning and truth, which came flooding into her mind, awakening an unquenchable desire for learning. Today, doctors and other scientists are looking at Helen Keller's remarkable visual imagery, verbal ability, and imagination as a way to better understand the formation of consciousness for those without sight or hearing, in the hope of helping other disabled people.
Helen herself spoke about an inner power, about imagination, but it is the form of imagination which can turn language into primary experience, or as if primary experience, which can, as it were, give ears and eyes, give imagery, give a world, give many worlds to someone who is deaf and blind. This is the most fabulous thing, and I think has always been, for me, the central interest of Helen's life.
It would be magnificently appropriate if her probing accounts of her inner life and her thoughts could become her greatest gift to humanity.
While this field of research is still new, it appears promising that studying Helen Keller's cognitive development may help bring new insight into the fields of cognitive science and consciousness studies. While Helen Keller continued writing all her life, she was disappointed that it never provided the income she and Annie needed, forcing them to try other avenues for means of support. She and Annie spent 5 years touring the country on the national lecture circuit. Then a movie producer convinced Helen to be part of his silent movie, Deliverance. However, it was poorly done and didn't do well at the box office. In 1919, when post-war inflation devoured their income, Helen and Annie even agreed to become part of the national Vaudeville stage for 3 years. Her friends disapproved, but Helen thrived on traveling, new ventures, and being in the hustle and bustle of activity and new people.
Life is a daring adventure, or nothing at all.
Their vaudeville act consisted of Annie and Helen telling their story.
When I saw Helen Keller first, she was 6 years and 8 months old. She had been blind and deaf and mute since her 19th month.
Annie Sullivan describes the process and difficulties Helen struggled with in learning how to speak.
I let her see, by putting her hand on my face, how we talked with our mouths. She felt the vibration of the spoken word. Instantly, she spelled, "I want to talk with my mouth." That seemed impossible. But after experimenting for a time, we found that placing her hand in this position, we found that she could feel the vibration of spoken words. After her 7th lesson, she was able to speak the sentence word by word, I am not dumb now.
No. The vaudeville tour now offered the average American the opportunity to see and appreciate the legendary Helen Keller as a warm and delightful woman. A vaudeville reporter wrote about his own first-hand experience of meeting the extraordinary Helen Keller.
I've never met a woman who attracted and fascinated me as does Helen Keller. There she sits in that steel cell in total silence, alone in all the universe. And yet, 1,000 different expressions chase each other over her face. She senses many things. Let anyone walk by that she has grown to know, and she will look up and smile. She recognizes the vibration of their footstep. If there is dancing or music on stage, she is beating time. And always, she is smiling. Will Cressy.
Privately, Helen led a deeply contemplative inner life, but outwardly, her life was filled with service, always campaigning for others, always caring about the poor and the afflicted, and doing everything she could to raise consciousness.
More than any other activity, Helen Keller was especially drawn to humanitarian work. Finally, after years of financial struggle, in 1924, she found both employment and useful service with the American Foundation for the Blind.
Helen Keller truly believed that she was put on this earth for a purpose. She found that purpose to spread happiness throughout the world by dedicating herself to others around her. She knew that true happiness could only be attained if it was to benefit the world.
Helen Keller worked for the American Foundation for the Blind for the last 44 years of her life and found her position an ideal outlet to practice Swedenborg's teaching that the perfection of humanity is in our service to others.
Love, the all-important doctrine, is the desire for good united with wisdom and fulfilled in right action. In our service to others, our love is made visible.
Helen Keller made so many contributions to the work of AFB and on behalf of blind people in our country. Legislation was a big contribution that Helen Keller made, and you can imagine the personal charisma that she had and how effective she was in influencing legislation. There were 4 or 5 Braille codes that existed at the time of the 30s. She brought everyone together to agree on a unified Braille code. And maybe most importantly for so many blind people today, talking books would have never happened without Helen Keller's advocacy. She made it happen, and 750,000 of blind and visually impaired people today, including myself, enjoy talking books.
Now, through her professional association, Helen Keller was able to use her education, skills, and personal charisma in an expanded sphere of service. She was invited to travel throughout the world on behalf of the American Foundation for the Blind and the U.S. government. This opportunity also fulfilled Annie's own lifelong commitment to help the handicapped. Wherever they traveled, they worked to dismantle the entrenched ignorance and widespread prejudice against the disabled.
She traveled to 39 countries during her life. And perhaps most importantly, she changed the perception of what disabled people can contribute to society.
One country that both Helen and Annie always wanted to visit was Japan. In 1936, when Annie's health began to fail, she begged Helen to fulfill their shared dream of visiting Japan.
And she always framed that trip as the result of a deathbed promise to Anne. Anne had insisted that she go to Japan to bring what she called light to blind people in Japan.
Though Helen acquired a devoted new companion in Polly Thompson, her grief in Annie's death was so overwhelming she couldn't think of traveling. But this changed after Helen underwent a striking experience of a visit from Annie's spirit.
My purpose was revitalized, as if she had spoken from her celestial home, encouraging me to go forth. I say my prayer. Before me as behind me is God, and all is well.
In 1937, with war imminent, Helen Keller submerged her personal loss in a larger purpose and traveled to Japan, drawing huge crowds wherever she went.
Helen Keller influenced the policies and practices of so many countries that she visited. A prime example is Japan. She visited Japan and convincing the rulers of that country that rehabilitation and educational services would work in helping people with disabilities achieve equal opportunity.
Over the 4 decades of her work with the American Foundation for the Blind and U.S. government, Helen Keller continued her worldwide travels as a champion of the poor, the oppressed, the underprivileged, and most especially of people with disabilities of all kinds.
And when you go out to life's struggles and adventures.
You will raise a banner.
You will raise a banner
who follow you.
For the deaf who follow you.
Throughout these years, she was deeply honored and beloved by many of the most revered and well-known people around the world. The deaf-blind girl from Alabama met many of the great and famous, including every U.S. president from Calvin Coolidge to John F. Kennedy. In 1964, Helen Keller was awarded her country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Wherever she went, enormous ecstatic crowds came out to greet her, desirous of seeing this great, kind, and nearly miraculous woman. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts Helen Keller gave others was the simple fact of her presence. Her immense vitality and capacity for joy amazed everyone who met her. For many people, meeting Helen precipitated a quasi-religious experience. Time after time, her presence moved people to tears.
A great throbbing sympathy has knit me to my fellow creatures with unbreakable bonds.
Martha Graham, the famous modern dance choreographer, met Helen Keller when she visited her dance studio. Amazingly, Helen was able to sense the flow of dance and music by feeling the vibrations in the air and floor.
As Martha Graham realizes, Helen's hands need not even touch the drums to feel intensely their vibrations.
Martha Graham said of Helen Keller, "She lets nothing stand in the way and is a witness to God." The famous violinist Jascha Heifetz played for Helen Keller and found her love and appreciation of music unforgettable. Jean Houston, renowned human potential expert, had a life-changing encounter when, at the age of 8, she met Helen Keller and asked her a blunt but poignant question.
And I blurted out with a child's savage honesty, "Why are you so happy?" And she laughed and laughed and laughed, and she said, "My child, it is because I live each day as if it were my last, and life in all its moments is so full of glory." Was she damaged? I suppose so. Was she damaged? Not at all. She had rewoven the remaining filaments of her senses into a net to capture everything. Her heart was immense. Her presence was so luminous. And one really felt oneself ignited, evoked, called into being in this, perhaps, the most beautiful, the most intelligent, the most honest human being I have ever known.
With the aid of her mentor, John Hitz, Helen had indeed rewoven her remaining senses into a remarkable empathic ability. While some have called Helen a mystic, her mysticism was in no way a retreat from the world. It resided in her highly developed empathy with others.
Mr. Hitz taught me that if I would only try to put myself in the place of those with sight and hearing and imagine their impressions of things, they could unite their senses with mine more and more, and thus wonderfully increase my enjoyment of the outer world. He showed me how I could find a key to their life and give them a chance to explore my own with understanding.
Helen's mysticism, if we call it that, was a profound spiritual insight, a deep intuitive understanding of the universe, and an empathic relationship with others. She could feel the Spirit of God in the most ordinary things of life.
The inner or mystic sense gives me a vision of the unseen. This sense relates to the spiritual world. It surveys the experience I gain from an imperfect touch world and presents it to my mind for spiritualization. This sense reveals the divine to the human in me. It forms bonds between earth and the great beyond, between now and eternity, between God and man.
The woman that I knew had radical empathy. She had leaky margins. She was available to people, to birds, to things that she could touch, to rhythms that she could feel. Was she intuitive? I don't know. Was she empathic? Was she utterly and completely there for another person? Yes, profoundly so.
People can't imagine how they would function as a deafblind person. And Helen Keller showed that despite any adversity, you can contribute to society, you can fulfill your dreams.
Most of us feel limited and hampered in certain ways by psychological or social or physical problems. But when we see her walk right through the prison walls of severe disabilities, we're shocked, we're inspired, we're challenged to overcome the things that we think are holding us back.
Helen Keller is a beacon. She is an evocateur of the possible. She's one of the great, great women of all time.
Helen Keller continues to inspire people the world over, and she has profoundly influenced many well-known people today, such as the celebrated blind athlete Eric Weinmeier. On May 25, 2001, against inconceivable odds, Eric Weinmeier became the first blind climber in history to attain the summit of Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain. Astoundingly, at age 34, Eric became one of less than 100 individuals to climb all of the world's 7 most challenging summits.
She taught me something very fundamental that's helped me in my life, and that is that what you're born with, I mean, that's finite, but what you do with it is completely limitless.
Good.
Nice.
Helen Keller inspired me in so many ways, in fact, the basis of my profession and what I try to do in the world. Because what I saw in Helen Keller was someone who was differently abled, indeed profoundly enabled.
Heather Whitestone McCallum overcame tremendous odds to become the first deaf Miss America in 1995.
Helen Keller, she was my role model, and she still is. She had more obstacles than I have. She's both deaf and blind, and I admire her. I don't know how she did it, but she did it. She said about how to face your problem. Face your problems, but don't let them master you. Let them teach you patience and sweetness and kindness, because you never know what miracles you will bring in other people's life or in your life.
My favorite Helen Keller quote is, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." And that quote in particular helped me to stop looking at my life in terms of advantages and disadvantages, that all of us are born with abilities and disabilities. And, you know, for me, I had to stop worrying about what I didn't have and think about how I do the best I can with what I have. And in that way, sometimes we can transform our lives and we can even impact the world.
Helen Keller's sense of service also influenced Eric. Whether he's off to Tibet with the group Braille Without Borders or to Italy with his own expeditions, Eric travels the world, teaching blind children leadership and climbing skills. Today, Helen Keller's legacy matters more than ever because her fearless, positive spirit can help inspire us to tackle and triumph over the many critical problems and inequities that threaten the global community.
We have a lot of challenges facing us, and I imagine we all feel from time to time like we're climbing blind. But I don't think this is the time to retreat. In fact, I think this is the most precious time in history to be a pioneer like Helen Keller, and by our example to lift up those around us and give them courage.
In her later years, Helen Keller reached out to a nearby Swedenborgian minister, Reverend Clayton S. Priestnall, who visited her at her home on numerous occasions. With this very set, now privately owned, the Reverend Priestnall administered communion to her. As she sensed the end of her life approaching, the profound understanding of her faith prepared Helen to face her death without fear.
I can't understand why anyone should fear death. Life here is more cruel than death. Life divides and estranges, while death is life eternal, reunites and reconciles. Swedenborg's revelations take from every grave its fear. I believe that when the eyes within my physical eye shall open upon the world to come, I shall simply be consciously living in the country of my heart.
After a series of strokes, Helen Keller died in 1968 at the age of 88. In spite of Helen's request to have Reverend Priestnall officiate at her funeral, Her family decided to hold the service in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., with the dean of the cathedral presiding. Helen's remains, along with those of her beloved Anne Sullivan Macy and Mary Polly Thompson, are interred there. Throughout her life, Helen Keller showed the world the shining, awesome immensity of her heart, mind, and soul. As Mark Twain prophesied, she will undoubtedly be as famous 1,000 years from now as she is today. She was a great and complete human being, an extraordinary humanitarian, a gifted writer, and a social activist. She was a woman whose deep religious faith influenced millions. Helen Keller's life and legacy will continue to matter and continue to inspire generations to come.